now we're going to open it up to some questions that we've had from the audience. And one of the questions that I was going to pose until David got involved was, is there a safe level of PFAS? And obviously there is not. David, do you know how many times the EPA has changed their drinking water standard for PFAS?
4 or 5. When we started, it was 400 parts advisory level, so no teeth to it. But the advisory level was 400 parts per trillion for short-term exposures to PFOA and PFOS in drinking water. It went down to 100, and then there was a special EPA guidance level only for Hoosick Falls that was 70, and now it's further down than that. A lot of states, Vermont has 8, New York, I said, had 10. New Jersey, Maine, a whole number of states are sort of pushing it down. One thing to note is that a lot of where it's at right now is not because underneath that level they're seeing no effects. That's the lowest level. The analytic devices we use can reliably detect PFAS.
Yeah.
And that we're at the lowest level of granularity that we can reliably detect it. That's the guidance level we're getting, which is more something that comes out of where our technology is than in seeing a real cutoff from exposure and impact.
Jeez. I have a question for either Julian or you, David, and that is, when a municipal plant, water treatment plant, collects all the PFAS, then what? Julian, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, if there's filtration that captures PFAS, you have contaminated filter media. So it either gets landfilled, which doesn't necessarily contain the PFAS forever, or it gets incinerated. And incineration at high enough temperatures under the right conditions, very high temperatures, can break down PFAS, but it's not known, like in most actual incinerators, if the conditions are right for true like full breakdown. Probably not full breakdown.
Yeah. The chemical bond is so strong, it just resists, which is what makes those products work, right, Dave?
I mean, the fact that the carbon fluorine bond was seen as the best firefighting foam tells you something. Like, it was designed to extinguish the most like incendiary sort of fires. And the notion that we could somehow incinerate these chemicals out of existence is kind of defies common sense. We were involved in a study at Norlite Incinerator in New York, where we did some soil sampling downwind of an incinerator that was accepting a lot of DOD's AFFF. And guess what we found? Fairly high levels of the PFAS compounds you'd associate with AFFF downwind in densely occupied neighborhoods of that incinerator. And those levels dropped off upwind and further out from the community. So that it wasn't a complete, it's a very preliminary study, but we have some evidence that these chemicals are not destroyed by incineration at all.
Yeah.
They're just redistributed into the communities that line incinerators. And we know that those communities are often poor communities of color.
Sure.
It's just redistributed. I mean, the incineration right now, in my sort of quick summary, is sort of redistributing some of that issue. We've had the issue of what to do with the PFAS saturated filtration systems here. And we've pushed hard to have the state send them to lined special, waste dumps that we thought were the best sort of, route out. Initially, they were getting, some of them were getting directed towards incinerators, and we tried to stop that.
Yeah. Gee whiz. Okay, a question for you, Jamie. How laborious is it to map regions in the similar way that you did for nitrogen in other areas? And my question was going to be, can we do that same kind of mapping for PFAS, right?
That's a good question. So I don't have an answer for PFAS. I'll let David or Jillian answer that. But the the results I showed, I went through them very quickly, but what we're working on right now is joining these three models together. So this kind of what happens in the ground, what do we put on, and specifically, what are residential fertilizer uses happening on people's home lawns. So that was the focus of the third study. That residential fertilizer use was based on a survey conducted by Robert Johnson, Howlon Wong, and Dave Newbern, and they covered most of Long Island, as well as I'd say the southern half of Connecticut. So they have that information on fertilizer use patterns throughout much of Long Island, and into they have Westchester County, all of that. There are gaps, and one of the reasons there are gaps is that Long Island specifically, certain towns or perhaps communities are missing data that are critical to the model. Things like when was a house built, and the footprint of the house. Because what they found is that there are relationships between how new is the house and how big is the house, in terms of what people are applying in terms of fertilizer use. Our current project right now is trying to fill in those gaps. So kind of take what we know and extrapolate to the rest of Long Island. Our final results are really going to focus on the North Shore of Long Island and the Connecticut coastline in Westchester, because we're funded by the Long Island Sound Study. So we're looking at that nitrogen to Long Island Sound. But the underlying data for all of these models are available throughout Long Island. And once we get through with this result, we'll be able to say, hey, you can take this for areas where you don't have the best data, and we can still get an estimate for the rest of Long Island. So that was a very long way to say, after we're done with our project, I think it will be relatively easy to extrapolate to the rest of Long Island. Westchester County will be covered, and then coastal Connecticut will be covered, and over half of Long Island will be covered.
Fantastic. Great. We're delighted to have legislator Al Krupski with us today. And he asks, Jillian, this is a question for you, because legislator Krupski is a farmer, I believe, and wanted to know what were the levels of PFAS being detected in the feed and the beef at that poor man's farm.
I think, and I'd have to check the exact levels. I think in the beef, it was a few parts per billion. And the hay, I don't recall. There are definitely some articles out there. And to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what the state was comparing to, because there aren't like actionable levels for food for those chemicals. But they must have done some kind of like analogous comparison to drinking water levels or something, or maybe just comparing to other tested food. Yeah, so it might not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about PFAS, parts per billion in food is actually significant.
Yeah, but certainly as a cautionary tale, especially in view of Governor Hochul's draft plan to increase the amount of sewage sludge spread on New York State farms. Seems like that's going in the opposite direction. Am I missing something here, or did that seem like a strange idea to anybody else? David?
I don't have or something, but it does seem strange.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be there's a lot of positive features that sound positive to market sewage sludge, and theoretically, we should be putting our waste back into the land. In the ideal world, that is exactly what we should be doing. That's like a natural cycle, but that would really require cleaning up all of what's going into it.
Yeah, Adrian reminds me that the EPA is scheduled to codify a new drinking water level at 4 parts per trillion by the spring of this year. So that's coming up fairly shortly. It keeps going down and down and down. I've heard that nanoballs and electromagnetism can potentially break the fluorinated carbon bonds. Anybody know about that, David?
I mean, I'm suspicious. I've heard people talk about this, and I know at least one scientist who was trying to test it a bit. and had a really, really hard time getting any results. So there was one version that sounded like maybe it could work theoretically, but the guy I know that tried to actually test it in a lab, it didn't work.
Can comment not on that technology. I'm not familiar with that, but I've listened to enough conference talks and read some papers. There are various companies and researchers working on on like actual truly breaking down PFAS into something inert. There are very few companies out there that will help clean up certain types of contaminated sites. I don't even know if that's happening in the US, but I know I've read about some like AFFF contaminated facilities in Australia or various places. And they typically involve like several steps to concentrate PFAS, aqueous PFAS, and then hit it with something really strong, like really, really strong oxidation. So it can be done. Like, yes, the chemists can figure out ways to break down PFAS, but to scale that up to anything, beyond a really small scale is really, really expensive and challenging. And that's why you don't see widespread, like, oh, let's just destroy the PFAS. Like, yeah, theoretically you can destroy PFAS, but doing it on a realistic scale is a whole other story.
Yeah, we saw that 3M was part of that $10 billion settlement, which was apparently was supposed to be used to clean up everybody's water. $10 billion won't begin to touch this problem. Not even pardon the expression, not even a drop in the bucket, because we're talking about everybody's water system. We're not talking about a few. Certainly lead pipes is terrible for people who are being fed their water in lead pipes, but the PFAS is everywhere, and everybody's being exposed to it. I'm just surprised, David. I share your outrage is the only way to put it, that these companies are still today, right now, they're making more PFAS, and you would think somebody would say stop.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, as the EPA and state started zeroing in on PFOA and PFOS, guess what happened? The factories near me in Hoosick Falls and Petersburg, they just switched over to other PFAS. We've gotten emission reports from those facilities that show PFAS are being emitted. They're not buying PFOA or PFOS, but they're still emitting PFAS. This is going to be the issue until we figure out how to regulate families of compounds.
Exactly.
That has to be a priority for folks.
Regrettable substitution, they call it, right? They change out one because they know it's going to take a while to do the science and to come up with the science that supports taking a policy, adopting a policy. So that's where I think, David, I think you were very correct in saying we have to think about, we've been using an old paradigm to solve a new problem, right? It's the Einstein thing. We're not going to fix this using the kinds of legislation and the kinds of policy changes and the way we go about things. And EPA, I think, is the perfect example. They've been testing one chemical at a time. That's why they've been doing it since 1972. That's not working anymore, right?
Yeah.
So
this is an opportunity to start to really demand the kinds of regulatory structures we need in this moment, instead of just trying to update things that are sort of slowly drifting out of date and increasingly shown to be kind of inadequate to the challenge we face. Let's think about the structure we need to regulate them. Yeah.
I'm reminded by one of our attendees that the Connecticut Attorney General rejected that settlement with 3M, and good for them. I mean, in our town here in Port Washington, we have these gigantic carbon filters that are going in at our water treatment plants, and I just look at it and I know how many millions of dollars that's not cheap. And to ask consumers to foot that bill, any of it, while the companies continue to make a profit, is tugs at your concept of right and wrong. Okay, I'm going to pause in the questions right now, and I do want to go over with the audience a little bit about our website, because it's important that they know what's there. So our homepage pretty much says it all. Water is, what it's all about. On our partners page, you're going to find a listing of all of the organizations that are part of our campaign. And again, I want to thank all of you who are with us today, who are part of these organizations. We really, really do appreciate your help and your support in this. And we're hoping that you can help us get the word out about our campaign this spring as people begin to think about their lawns. If you're challenged on the science, we have a science page which goes through many of the published peer-reviewed science with regard to both PFAS and nitrogen in drinking water. So, you know, if you can't get to sleep one night and you're really looking for something to help, think about reading through some of these studies. They're very, very interesting. And again, these are all published, peer-reviewed, independent studies. These are not studies funded by any of the industries that are involved. Our fertilizer page I mentioned before has the list of fertilizers that have certified that their products have no PFAS and that they have a nitrogen level below 12%. Let me just talk about that for a second. On a bag of fertilizer, some of you may know it's got 3 numbers on it, right? It's like 36, 12, 6 or whatever it is. That first number is the percentage of nitrogen in the bag. And what we've been advocating for a while is to promote the use of fertilizers that have less than 12% nitrogen in the bag. And one of the reasons is simple human behavior. People with a lawn go to the hardware store, they go to the big box store and they buy a bag of fertilizer. They bring it home, they put it in their spreader, and they walk around until it's gone. That's how they do it. I understand professional landscapers don't do it that way because they've got, you know, money on the line and so on. But their fertilizer is just as water soluble as any other fertilizer. The fertilizers we've got here not only have less than 12% nitrogen, so even if you put down the whole bag, you're not going to do any harm. It's just going to take a little longer for the soil biology to make the nitrogen available to the plants. But we have products that are being sold at Home Depot, you know, 27, 28% nitrogen, and half of it is water soluble, which means as soon as it rains, that nitrogen is running off your lawn and into the streams and bays and so on. So we're trying to get away from that. Let's skip over to the legislation page for all of our legislators and their staffs who are with us. We've drafted, you know, very basic draft legislation that we think gets at this. What it does is essentially says that fertilizers that are sold or used on Long Island should be certified by their manufacturers to be free from PFAS and have a nitrogen level less than 12. You know, we think it's common sense. There are plenty of products on the market that people can go. You can get those products at Home Depot or Lowe's or your local garden store. So we're not doing anybody out of their fertilizer. But these fertilizers would all be safer. And you know what? Markets are driven by public demand. So if I can get, you know, guys to go into Home Depot and say, my wife sent me here to get lawn fertilizer, but it's got to have a number less than 12. That's how we drive the market. And eventually all the major manufacturers will either buy or start making fertilizer that meets those specifications. Finally, on the materials page, all of these materials that we produced for this program are available free to all of all of our supporters and to anybody who wants them. We have the Long Island Lawn Care Guide. That's for lawns in Westchester and Long Island. It talks about ways to take care of your lawn without using fertilizers high in nitrogen or PFAS. We have our Blue Water Card, which is essentially you know, how precious our water is and how it's protected, how we can protect it from all kinds of hazardous chemicals and so on. Our Green Lawn Card was the thing that Patty and I started with when Grassroots was started back in 2000. It was one of the first things we produced, and it's still one of our most popular. On one side, it talks about it's an organic lawn care program, step by step. And on the other side, it talks about pesticides and the way they can contaminate our water. Protecting our water and using it wisely is a nice general flyer about how we need to take care of our water. And finally, how to talk to your landscaper about your lawn. This is for people who have a lawn service and they just don't know what to say. And this tells them exactly what to say, and it's in Spanish as well as English. So we're trying to, cover all the bases here and give people what they will need to take, to do what they can in their communities uh, and and protect our water. What can homeowners, parents, and individuals do to protect themselves now? Scott Sherwood is asking about what do we do? What are you guys doing? Let me ask you this question. What are you doing in your own lives about PFAS? Haha. Dead silence. Nobody knows what to do. I know, we saw this. Momavation is one of the sites that we are aware of, and its founder was on part of our radio show last week. Momavation is a great site because they actually do lab testing for things like PFAS and other things. And if you don't know about that site, I suggest you go take a look for all the consumers who are wondering what they can do in their lives. They've tested a lot of things. It's Momavation, Mamavation, Momavation.org. I suggest you go take a look. Anybody have any closing thoughts here about what you're doing in your own lives as far as PFAS is concerned?
I've been asked this before, so I have a couple answers ready. There's obviously lots of things we can't control, but the indoor environment I have focused on by not having furniture that is stain proof. And like I have removable covers on my upholstered, it's not even upholstered, they're more like futon furniture. And also I don't have carpet, and if I get rugs, I try to get natural materials. So the indoor environment is part of it. Definitely, I don't use this like an aftermarket sprays like Scotchgard that can be actually pretty high exposure. And I try to be careful when buying outdoor clothing like jackets. And there are starting to be some certifications or claims of PFAS free. Got to be a little careful with the labeling. It needs to state PFAS free, not just one compound free. But those are some things.
Jamie?
So not that I think of PFAS specifically, although now I will. But I think what Jillian mentioned, it kind of applies to all of our sustainability issues. And so I've done a lot of the same things where, I moved into a new house. I was leaving my furniture behind, and when it was time to start to build that new house, it was, the sustainable materials, making sure that I was getting wood furniture with natural materials, trying to buy natural material clothing, avoiding plastic. I am trying so hard to get my mom to give up her nonstick pan. I'm like, please stop using that. So I think that, as a consumer who is not at Jillian and David's level of knowledge about this, I have heard about PFAS, and that has been filtering into my habits over time. And I think that's true of all of our efforts at sustainability, for the sustainability of our own health and that of our environment, both within our home and then also our wider environment.
David?
It's a great question. I try to resist the notion that we as individuals can consume our way out of this problem, or that it's our responsibility in some insulated way from those who've profited by dumping this mess in our laps, that it's now our sort of individual responsibility to manage. So I continue to do everything I can to shine the brightest light I can find on the ongoing authorship of this crisis by those industries that continue to profit from PFAS.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, Jamie.
I had to find the unmute. So something Jillian said really, struck home with me, and that was the idea of recycling, at recycling our nutrients, recycling our resources. And that comes down to things like fertilizer use, where, we don't want to just dump the fertilizer that we spent so much money harvesting into the ocean. If we can capture that fertilizer, ideally in organic ways. So, using like compost instead of getting, the manufactured urea. But it goes beyond fertilizer and nitrogen and into things like recycling water. Fresh water is going to become a resource that is scarce. It already is in the western part of our country. So thinking ahead to how do we recycle nutrients? How do we recycle water and not just lose these resources to the natural environment where they're causing harm? They were never meant to go there. But it brings in this issue of PFAS. So the more we recycle, the more chance that we're concentrating PFAS in our environment. So all of these things are really tightly linked together. And we need to start thinking more holistically about how we address these issues. Yeah.
Well said. Well, I can't thank you guys enough. Dr. Jamie Vaudry, Dr. Jillian Miller, Dr. David Bond, thank you so much for being part of our webinar today. We've had a lot of great comments from the audience and a lot of kudos to you three for your presentation. So I want to thank you for that. Again, I want to remind our audience that the website liwater.org is your place to go. And of course, you can reach out to us at Grassroots Environmental Education in Port Washington for materials, comments, questions, complaints. We're here. We handle it all. We want to hear from you. We want to have you. I'm hoping that you'll be part of our campaign to reach out to the wider audience of consumers in Westchester County and on Long Island. So again, thank you for being here today. We appreciate your support of this program. Thank you to all of you who attended. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you again, panelists. It's been a total pleasure. Bye now.